This begins with the announcement that Yu Hansel, who is crazy in love with the gym, is trying to deadlift 10 tons, which would be the first time in history that he performs the deadlift. At the age of 17, he became the strongest living thing, but this is short-lived as he falls to the ground. Yu Hansel's body goes through changes, granting him different abilities, but all he could think about was whether women really prefer muscular men and getting his protein. He fell unconscious. While Yu Hansel was still lying on the ground, giant chicken packets were around him, but when he woke up, the chickens who were picking at him ran away, and because of the confusion, his calm skill activated afterwards. He took a look at his surroundings, surrounded by huge chickens, and concluded that he must have ended up in hell because of the chickens' resentment for eating too much chicken breast. The chickens start picking him again. This annoyed him, so he hits one of them, causing the others to back off. Another one of his skills, Hawkeye, activates, allowing him to see the protein content of the chicken. Seeing that the chickens are worth 68 kilograms of protein, he jumps at them, leaving nothing but the bones. After eating all that protein, Yu Hansel sits under a tree but gets concerned about his lack of size, so he makes his way to a lake, where he sees that the results of his hard work in his previous life have disappeared after seeing his tiny body. Where he was didn't matter to him. All that mattered to him was getting his size back, and in order to get his huge body back, he approved to treat himself to performing leg squats, asking his efforts not to betray him. After 3 months of training, his efforts have been betrayed, but even though he didn't get as big as he wanted, Yu Hansel is happy that he has more than enough protein, and while getting ready to continue his training, a giant monster chicken called cockatrice appears. Yu Hansel started running away from the monster, but it proved difficult because Yu Hansel couldn't take his eyes off the monster's chest. The system activates, notifying him that the cockatrice has a great amount of protein, and if he is able to consume the monster, he will obtain the rare skill of amazing muscle recovery. Upon hearing this, Yu Hansel decides it's worth risking his life for those rewards. While charging up a skill, the system warns him to deactivate, but Yu Hansel continues, and he surpasses his muscle limit, granting him the unique skill. Changing skeleton like something straight out of One Piece, Yu Hansel's arms grew to the size of giants, and he used them to give the cockatrice a heavy blow, killing the chicken. Yu Hansel was thankful for the meat he had gotten as he lay flat on the floor. The system activates, obtaining an amazing muscle recovery skill. Yu Hansel prepared the chicken and started eating it. He wondered what kind of place it was and why his muscles disappeared again, and it seems that there is something wrong with his bodybuilding knowledge. And also what kind of things lived there and in what kind of situation he was in. The ghouls who lived in the forest were perceiving the smell of something coming in towards them. One of them said he had not smelled mine in a while. The ghouls wondered that there was no way the one who defeated the cockatrice was the one who towards them. One of them said he has not smelled meat on a while. The ghouls went to Yu Hansel to ask him, but they were afraid that Yu Hansel could be a dangerous monster. Yu Hansel, seeing the ghouls, asked them who they were. They replied to Yu Hansel, telling him that they were the ghouls from Mine Alley. Yu Hansel thought to himself that he had never seen a species like that before as he continued to eat the chicken meat. However, the ghouls were looking for the person who defeated the cockatrice. They asked Yu Hansel if he happened to know about it. Yu Hansel said to them that it was a chicken with an owner. The ghouls were happy that they found the person who killed cockatrice, the strongest monster in the Mine Alley, and so a turf war between different races will start. Yu Hansel looked at the skinny legs of the ghouls. The ghouls told Yu Hansel that since he defeated the cockatrice, they asked Yu Hansel to protect them as they pleaded. Yu Hansel thought of it as he asked them to explain again since he was not paying attention to them at all. The ghouls told him that they had explained it to him for the 9th time already. Yu Hansel laughed at them, telling them that whatever they are doing, they must give it at least 10 attempts. The ghouls were speechless for a while as they decided to go since Yu Hansel was not willing to help them. However, Yu Hansel told them he was busy training his muscles and didn't have the time to help them. As they turned to leave, Yu asked them to come and take a chicken breast. They turned back to take the chicken breast since they hadn't had fresh meat in a while. Yu apologized to them for not being able to help. Meanwhile, the ghouls thanked Yu for the gift. The chicken breast was so big that when one of the ghouls bent down to carry the meat, Yu Hansel shouted at him to wait, thinking that the ghouls might break his back. You asked them if they know how dangerous deadlifting with the wrong posture is. In extreme cases, you will be lifting your own death sentence. You almost greeted a forever goodbye with your back, Yu Hansel told him. In confusion, the ghoul apologized and asked Yu what he had done wrong. Yu made it known to them that they were skinny because they had no idea what deadlifting was. The ghouls decided to carry it all together, and just then, Yu Hansel remembered the teaching of his teacher when he was in elementary school. When your body stops growing, try teaching others, and it is sure it will help them. However, Yu Hansel decided to go with them to their village after they ate. To deal with Yu losing his muscles, he asked the ghoul that they would leave tomorrow morning. Later on, Yu Hansel was welcomed to the village by the Ghoul Lord, the ruler of all ghouls, and as they were talking, he couldn't stop himself from thinking about what poor physical shape the Ghoul Lord was in. Yu imagined if the Ghoul Lord was like the Indian chief, and the skinny arms, legs, and fat belly of the Ghoul Lord reminded him of a toad. Yu looked closely at the Ghoul Lord, and he lacks exercise and also has abdominal obesity. However, the Ghoul Lord gratefully received Yu's gift and ordered the underlings to bring the rest of the meat as well. Yu said to himself, it will take them forever to bring all that. The Ghoul Lord explained to Yu that it has been a real pain for them ever since Yu defeated the cockatrice. He went further to explain that the ghouls were the weakest race in Mine Alley. They were weak in physical combat, and they cannot use any skills, unlike the Ghoul Lord himself, so they live off of the rotten flesh on the ground. The topic of skills came up, and not knowing what a skill was, Yu Hansel asked for an explanation, but he was looked down upon by the Ghoul's Lord for not knowing what a skill was. The Ghoul Lord ordered the ghoul to bring in the underlings that brought Yu here. The 3 ghouls that brought Yu were tied up with a rope as the guards brought them forward. The ghoul knelt before the Ghoul Lord. The Ghoul Lord told them they might not know what they had done wrong. The 3 ghouls were sent to bring the one who defeated the cockatrice so he could make him one of his underlings. But the Ghoul Lord felt the 3 ghouls had lied to him. He raised his weapon to strike the 3 ghouls, telling them to pay for their crimes with their lives. Just then, Yu, with his power, held the Ghoul Lord's weapon as he nearly struck the 3 ghouls. Yu questioned the Ghoul Lord if it was the village custom to waste people's workout time and to pick on weak people. Yu asked the Ghoul Lord to answer his questions as he called the Ghoul Lord a bastard. However, the Ghoul Lord wondered if he didn't activate his power or maybe he didn't use his full strength so that a trash mob like Yu couldn't block his attack. The Ghoul Lord admitted that Yu was one lucky guy but would get to witness his skill. The Ghoul Lord's skill was called Heavy Blunt, which can double the weight of any object and increase it up to 10 times. With the amount of mana I have, I can quadruple the weight, Ghoul's Lord said. Just then, he raised his weapon again to strike the 3 ghouls. Yu blocked the attack, and the ghouls' weapons were scattered into pieces. Both the 3 ghouls and the Ghoul Lord were surprised. Ghoul's Lord anticipated that Yu's skills were amazing but a waste since they were enemies. With one arm raised, Yu held the Ghoul Lord's throat. He was panicking. Then move your thighs and put strength into your lower body and whole body to pull it up from the floor, and the 4th thing after you have lifted it up is to wrap it around your knees. The Ghoul Lord was confused when Yu mentioned 3 big lifts, and he was wondering if it meant to take a turn and hit each other 3 times. Yu went further to explain, holding the Ghoul Lord's throat, that the 3 big lifts are the bench press, squat, and deadlift. And when one asks about your 3 big lifts, they are asking about how much total weight you can lift in these 3 lifts that are considered the most important ones. System, keep your skill calm, was activated. Later on, Yu Hansel introduces the Ghoul Lord to a wooden weightlifting that was in front of him, where the rest of the ghouls gathered to watch. The Ghoul Lord reminded Yu Hansel not to forget their promise to become his subordinate if he lost. Likewise, Yu told him not to forget to tighten his abs or his back would break. Meanwhile, the Ghoul Lord thinks to himself that Yu Hansel is a fool for thinking he doesn't know that Heavy Blunt can be used to reduce the weight of an object. With the Heavy Blunt skill the Ghoul Lord used, he lifted the object that weighed 200 kilograms. It was the turn of Yu Hansel to try his own, as he told them to pay attention to what he would be doing if he won. He started doing exercises that can determine the strongest strength a human has. There could be injuries, and you need to always stretch your hips and try to proceed with the most correct posture. Yu stretched his leg forward as he said, "The first thing about deadlift posture is to ensure your legs are shoulder width apart." He stood up and placed his hands on the object as he told them the second thing is to open your chest and put strength into your back, waist, abs, to get into position, while the third thing would be to try to make your shin vertical to the barbell. After telling them all this, Yu lifted the object, throwing it up. All the ghouls gathered were very surprised to see Yu throw the object in the air. However, Yu told them that he failed to control his strength and suggested they make another barbell. Just then, all the ghouls bowed down, telling Yu Hansel to accept them and become their ghoul lord. As the ghoul lord lost the third round, he started to obey Yu really well. However, Yu learned that the place he was in was a different world from the one in which he was born, but there was also a legend that people who came to this world were able to go back to their own world after talking with the ghoul lord. Yu Hansel decided to stay, knowing that they would call him Anchovy if he went back to his world in the state he was in. Thus, the Ghoul Lord promised to be loyal to him. The name Ghoul Lord was confusing to Yu, as he suggested he call him Ghoul Lord. Meanwhile, Ghoul Lord took Yu to where they train their warriors. Yu Hansel thought to himself that, seeing their bodies, he did expect to see the training ground to be a bad one, but it was much better. Yu asked the Ghoul Lord what kind of training they had been doing. Ghoul Lord replied that they had no knowledge of such things. He told Ghoul Lord to forget about it and order them to gather in 5 rows. Yu Hansel stood in front of them, addressing them. He said he was told that the ghouls were the weakest, but they live on by eating the leftover food of other monsters. Yu enlightens them that what they need is teamwork, information on the opponent's speed, and a strong body as well. The ghouls listen with keen interest. Yu Hansel promised to train them for 3 months to become warriors. The ghouls responded that they wouldn't be looked down on anymore. Yu Hansel told them the first thing they would start with was learning the front rest position. The ghouls were confused, as they didn't understand what Yu meant by that. Yu demonstrated it by showing them the position and asking them to follow what he did. Next, Yu told them to start a warm-up of 100 push-ups. 3 hours later, the rest of the ghouls were tired. Some couldn't stand up, while others were groaning in pain. As Yu were in 24,768 push-ups by count, the Ghoul Lord called his attention to the fact that there were no more ghouls who could still go on. Yu asked them to do 100 more push-ups before they had their meal. "After making us do 70 push-ups, we have to do 100 more," one of the ghouls said out of frustration and fatigue. One of the ghouls groans in pain, saying he can't continue. He might die if he does more than this, and it was better when the Ghoul Lord was their boss. Yu ordered them to stop and stand up. It was enough. Yu wondered if the Ghoul Lord would challenge him again to take back his position. One of them shouted that he felt like his body was going to shatter. One of them announced that they were going to eat. Yu Hansel shouted that it is because they have such a mentality that they are being called the weakest. He asked them if they were really fine with being called the weakest ones. "This place is a wilderness. Only the strongest survive in the wilderness," Yu said to them. Yu shouts at them, telling them that if they are that kind of trash, they should get out since he is the one who refuses to train them, but for the one who stays here and continues to do the push-ups, he will give that person muscles that can protect what's important to him. Later on, Yu Hansel explains to them that the best trainer is someone who can motivate, someone who isn't determined at all to exercise. The ghouls went back to their push-ups. You should encourage them to act like someone who is going to die and to use all their strength to push away themselves, who are weak, and to protect their parents, father with your right hand and mother with your left hand. Yu Hansel continued to encourage them to push to relieve the burden on their parents for the revival of their tribe and for them to change. With just a little motivation, all the ghouls stopped complaining. It was possible because Hansel was right. It wasn't clear if he realized that he had such a skill, but at that moment, a trainer skill that Hansel had was leveling up. 3 months later, the lizardmen went secretly to the ghouls' village to attack them. One of the lizardmen asked if they were going down the right path to Ghoul Village. As they approached closer, one of them confirmed that he could see the ghouls' village and suggested they arrange a formation before attacking the ghouls' village. The lizardmen were determined to take over the ghouls' village as their first colony. Meanwhile, the ghouls were fully prepared as they sighted the lizardmen. Hansel asked the bench press group to open their chests, breathe in, put force on their stomachs, force their sphincters, watch their opponents, and press. The ghouls charged, killing the lizardmen. The leader of the lizardmen was surprised to see his men being killed and shouted, "Who did this?" Hansel approached him, telling him who he thought could do it. Hansel told him that it was the ghoul monsters who weren't the weakest anymore. The ghouls' muscles were already being developed.